Hey there, everybody. Mr. Mark with you. And what we're going to do here in this video today is start setting up an Excel spreadsheet so that we can quickly collect and analyze data, specifically in the Hooks Law Lab. But these are skills that you're going to use through many physics and science and math courses. And Excel is just a really handy tool in general to get to learn how to use. So this is going to be our first introduction to that. From your start menu on your school issue device, you might find Excel over here, kind of in the pinned tabs. You may also have to go down here to the ease in your start menu, and you may have to click on it there. If you get the browser based version of Excel, like it looks like you're in your web browser, exit out of that, try the other icon in your start menu. But this is where you want to be. If you're having trouble getting here, then that means you need to update your Microsoft Office through the Software Center. And that's probably something that you have to do on campus after updating your computer a few times. So make sure you're here and not the browser version of Excel. We're always going to start with a blank workbook. That's going to open up something that looks like this. And if you haven't ever used a spreadsheet before, a spreadsheet is basically a open grid of cells where you have rows go this way, and columns go this way. This is essentially infinite, so we're only going to work with a small part of it. But if you scroll down, you're going to get more and more rows. And if you scroll over to the side, you're going to get more and more columns. For the most part, we're only going to need just a little bit of space. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to title this thing, just as a way to get started with some of the formatting things we need to learn. So I'm going to click on cell A1. I'm going to go ahead and type in the name of this assignment, which is the Hooks Law Lab. And then just press enter. And if you go back up to that cell, notice up here, you see it here, and you also see it here. This is called the formula bar. This can be used for inspecting the details of a cell. And as we start using formulas, you'll become more and more accustomed with the difference between this right here and what you actually see here. First thing I want you to kind of notice is that this spills over from column A into column B. And if we were to then type in something in column B, like my name, for example, notice that that then cuts off column A. So there's a few things that I can do. One, I can resize this column. The way that I resize a column is by putting my cursor in between the two so that it changes into this sort of left and right arrow. And then I click and drag, and I can make the column wider. If I put my cursor there and I double click, it will make it size as large as the longest thing that I have in there. If you're not familiar with undo, there's the undo button up there. You can also control Z. This is a really important computer tip. Control Z undoes stuff. Suppose I don't want to necessarily make this column larger. The other thing I can do is merge these two cells together. And so if I click on cell A1 and I drag over to B1, and then I click on this merge and center button, that's going to basically turn these two cells into one and merge it and center it across the cell. If I wanted that to be at like the top of the entire page and centered, I can do that for like all these cells. I can merge and center it. Just like with Word and other things, you have lots of formatting options here in the font thing. So if the title, I can make it bold. Maybe I can make the font bigger. I can make it a different color font, or this is really handy, I can also highlight cells. And so the highlighter tool comes in really handy when we're trying to like separate data sets and things like that. For now, I'm just going to make it look like that. In our lab today, we are going to try to see if there's a relationship between the stretch of a spring and the force that it exerts. And so I'm going to create two columns, one for force, and I'm going to go ahead and put in the unit for force right there, and the other for stretch. Maybe we do stretch in centimeters. And so notice that centimeters kind of spills over from cell C to D. I could make the column larger. I could also make the row larger and have this wrap around. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on that cell. I'm going to click on wrap text up here. And then notice that now instead of being stretched horizontally, now the text just wraps around and creates a larger row so that it all fits. Looking at that, that kind of doesn't look very good because now force is at the bottom. So if I select those two, I can control where the text shows up using these things up here. So these are my horizontal alignments up here, so I can center them both. And these are the vertical alignments, so I can center them so that they're right in the middle of the cell going up and down. Last thing to know before we kind of move on to the next step is that when I put numbers into an Excel spreadsheet, like forces for instance, I can include letters with that. So for instance, if I measure a force of 12.3 newtons and I type in 12.3 N, it's not going to recognize it as a number. If I want it to be just a number, I need to do just 12.3. That's why I put the unit up here. If I have letters and numbers combined in a cell, Excel thinks that that is text and it's not going to be able to do any math with it. And the whole reason we're using this thing is we want it to do math for us. So, for instance, if I were to want to, say, divide this number by 2, I can do that with a formula. The way that we start a formula is we type an equal sign, click on that, and say, hey, divide that by 2 for me. If I have a letter in there, it's going to give me an error message. Whereas if I do that with this number, say, hey, take that number, divide it by 2 for me, it's going to do it with no problem. And so we don't want to include numbers with our, letters with our numbers in an Excel spreadsheet. Include your units up here at the top. So come back over here, 12.3. Notice that when it changed back to just a number by itself, it moved over to the right side. That's kind of the default placement for when you put in numbers. 12.4, 12.5, 12.6. So when we get into the lab, we can collect our data and just go ahead and put it straight into the spreadsheet. For now, let's go ahead and leave it empty because we don't have anything there yet. We've done quite a bit with this. Let's go ahead and save this. The save button, and you do need to click the save button, it is important, is up here. You might get a thing that looks like this. You might click down here on more options. If you haven't set up a bunch of file folders yet, you might not have anywhere really handy to save this yet. So what you might do is you might come over here to browse and you get something that looks like this. And then you might just go to like your documents or something like that. And you can right click in there and you can create a new folder. And so maybe you call this folder physics or science or something like that. And then open up that folder and then give it a meaningful title right there where it says file name. So maybe we call this Hooke's Law Lab or something like that. Now, once it's saved, notice I see the title up here at the top. And then anytime I click the save button up here, it's going to be saved to your hard drive. This is not like Google stuff where it saves automatically. And so if you really mess something up, it's real easy. You just close it out and reopen it, and it won't save the messed up version. But if you forget to click the little button over there and then you close the program or you turn your computer off or whatever, you're going to lose your work. So get in the habit of hitting the save button often. You can also on your keyboard hit Control S and it will save it as well. We'll talk later on about how to take our data and graph it. For right now, the last thing I want to show you is how to see what your work is going to look like when you upload it to Canvas or print it out. And so in the file menu up here, there is a print option. And when you first click on print, it's going to show you here exactly what your work is going to look like on a piece of paper. And so if your work doesn't fit neatly on a single sheet of paper, what we need to do is come back to this. Notice that I get a little dashed line where the edge of the piece of paper would be. It's called a page break. There'll also be one at the bottom down here. And then I need to either like make my column smaller. So notice if I make the column smaller, now K fits on there. So for instance, if I had something typed over here in K, for instance, my name, and then I went over here to print preview, I don't see it. It's on the second page. I don't want that. I want my work to be neat on one page. If I can make these columns smaller, Now notice that K shows up. Now when I go back to print preview, now it's going to look like I want it to look. You can move things like graphs around. So if my graph automatically came over here, I can just drag it down here to the bottom, and do other little simple things on here to kind of make my work laid out a little bit better. Of course, when I'm making a change, I want to save my work. Last thing that you need to know how to do kind of right off the bat is how to save your work as a PDF. So if you come back to this file menu and go to save as, over here where we saved our work earlier, the drop down here lets you save it in different file format types. So to save your work for turning things in, you want to save it as a PDF. Click that drop down, click on PDF, and then click on save. And then your work will be saved as a PDF in the same file folder where you saved your original Excel spreadsheet. So notice now instead of a row of infinite grid, I get just a single page with exactly what I want to print on there. And so if you're going to turn your work into me, you would do this first so that it's laid out nicely like a piece of paper and not an infinite row of grids. Um, as we go throughout the year, we're going to learn more about what all these different things do. So for right now, I need you to kind of set up a table of forces and stretches, maybe give it a title. If you want to do something like alternate different colors in your data table to make it look nicer, you can also do some borders. So come over here, draw a border grid, something like that. If you wanted to kind of have some borders around it, it's completely up to you. Um, I don't like that. I don't like that. Control Z and it's undone. Learn how to Control Z, y'all. Um, and as we go throughout the year, we'll learn more and more about what all these different things do and how they're useful to you now and how they'll be useful to you later. Till now, let's set that up, save it for next time, and I'll see y'all then. Ta ta.